we have yet more Trump officials that are testifying in front of House impeachment investigators. So now, this time, one of the people making testimony, or one of the people testifying, uh, actually talked about Rudy Giuliani. So now, Giuliani, of course, right now has a role, or played a role in the campaign to pressure Ukrainian government into investigating Donald Trump's political enemies, as well as trying to discredit the Mueller report. Now, we know that. We also know that Giuliani does not work for the State Department. He's Donald Trump's personal lawyer. And yet he seems to be acting on as a member of the State Department. He's trying to do diplomacy on behalf of the president. So that actually did worry quite a few people in the Trump administration, including John Bolton. And this is according, of course, to testimony from State Department Foreign Service Officer Christopher Anderson, who is telling investigators that former National Security Advisor Bolton had cautioned him about Rudy Giuliani and his efforts. So that's interesting, right? In fact, he said that Giuliani was, quote, a key voice with the president on Ukraine, which would complicate U.S. goals. Now, U.S. goals, of course, in Ukraine would be to, of course, protect Ukraine from Russian aggression. And that Russian aggression, of course, came to a head when Russia had annexed Crimea. So, understandably, the Ukrainians were actually very, very concerned that Russia would, do something similar or encroach on their territory even more. And so they turned to the United States for aid. And until the Trump administration, the United States had no problem supplying aid, money, weapons to Ukraine to stand behind them to make sure that Russia does not get more aggressive and try to seize more territory. But what happened, like I said, in the Trump administration is that Trump held up nearly $400 million worth of that aid that was already passed by Congress in order to try to pressure the Ukrainians into doing an investigation into Burisma and Joe Biden, as well as an investigation into CrowdStrike, which they falsely claim is a Ukrainian company that has some sort of hidden server that contains information that would discredit the Mueller report and the hacks by Russia. Okay, so yeah, again, that's a conspiracy theory. There's literally no proof of that. There is no server in Ukraine, and yet they said, "Well, you know what? We want you to look anyway. We want you to launch this giant investigation as a favor to me because we've been very, very good to you, Ukraine. I mean, look at all the money. I mean, we're very good to you." And the State Department, of course, um, under Trump, had well, I'm sorry, not the State Department, but Trump himself held up this money that was already approved to go to Ukraine, and so that's what we have going on so far. Now, okay, so now this shows, by the way, speaking of the administration, they were concerned about Giuliani and his back channel involvement with US's Ukrainian policy and his push for those investigations into Democrats. Now, of course, they were actually pretty worried before the infamous July 25th phone call between Trump and Zelensky, as of course, Giuliani had traveled to Ukraine multiple times prior to that. Okay. Now, at Focus is a June meeting in which he said that Bolton expressed support for the administration's goals of strengthening energy cooperation between the U.S. and Ukraine and getting new Ukraine leader Volodymyr Zelensky to undertake anti corruption reforms. Now, however, um, Bolton had cautioned that Mr. Giuliani, like I said, was a key voice for the president on Ukraine, which could be an obstacle to increased White House engagement. Now, again, we know that Giuliani was helping Trump push these investigations into the Bidens under the guise of fighting Ukrainian corruption, which ironically didn't involve very many Ukrainians. He was setting up meetings, working with several Ukrainian born businessmen, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, to try to set up gas deals with the Ukrainian government. Okay, using a private company, by the way. Now, we also know that Giuliani was paid about $500,000 for his work with Parnas, by Parnas's company. And they were all looking into, like I said, together to get dirt on Joe Biden. Now, apparently, Bolton didn't seem to be a fan of that effort, despite, of course, sharing similar goals. For example, Bolton wanted to sell more natural gas to the Ukrainians. Well, that makes sense. Bolton is incredibly conservative. And so, of course, he would want to have some sort of deal. But he's looking at Giuliani like, this guy's going to mess it up because he's an idiot. And look, we don't know 100% why Bolton was concerned. But again, I would assume that Giuliani, since he was not part of the government, could, I guess, get in the middle of negotiation without actually having clearance to be able to do so. Or, like I said, Giuliani's just not a smart guy, and he could blunder his way out of it. I don't know. Maybe it's a combination of different factors. We'll have to find out if Bolton ever does get a subpoena and answers that subpoena. Either way, Bolton seems to have gotten in the way of President Trump's efforts in Ukraine when it comes to these investigations. Now, Anderson, back to Chris Anderson here, he's also testifying that the Trump administration had blocked the statement condemning Russian aggression towards Ukraine. So now this happened in November of 2018, right? Russia had seized Ukrainian military vessels in the Sea of Azov, which, of course, the State Department said, no, we must go out and we must condemn that. Except that, according to Anderson, Trump blocked it. So now he says, quote, in a statement, while my colleagues at the State Department quickly prepared a statement condemning Russia for its escalation, senior officials in the White House blocked it from being issued. Now, I'm kind of curious as to why this was blocked in the first place. Why would you block a condemnation of Russia? Very, very interesting. It's just something maybe to think about, right? That's involved with this testimony. Now, there's another, by the way, in addition to Anderson, another Foreign Service officer set to testify today, and that's Catherine Croft. Now, Catherine Croft says that at her time at the National Security Council, she had received multiple phone calls from a lobbyist named Robert Livingston, telling her that the then ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, should be fired. Again, that was another thing that Giuliani, that Trump had actually pushed for. Remember, they wanted to get rid of that lawyer, or I'm sorry, not that lawyer, but by that ambassador, because she was supposedly corrupt. In reality, she wasn't pushing for these investigations. And so, interesting, right? In fact, here's the argument, though, that they used against Yovanovitch. Quote, he characterized Ambassador Yovanovitch as an Obama holdover. This is the lobbyist, Livingston, and associated with George Soros. It was not clear to me at the time or now to whose direction or whose expense Mr. Livingston was seeking the removal of Ambassador Yovanovitch. So, look, could it be somebody Giuliani had hired? I don't know. Could it be Lev Parnas, Igor Fruman? I don't know. Could it be Donald Trump? We don't know yet. But I'm assuming this testimony, which is currently ongoing, we might find out some answers. Or ongoing testimony. So that's very interesting. Because again, you've got these lobbyists now calling up and saying, get rid of this Ukrainian, this ambassador, and let's put in our guy, because that's an Obama guy. They're not playing ball with our efforts to try to, access Ukraine or get the Ukrainians to buy our natural gas and do these energy deals, and they're something with George Soros, which is incredibly strange. But then again, conspiracy theories. Donald Trump believes in them. These insane conspiracy theories, like I said, with CrowdStrike and George Soros and funding the caravans and all this ridiculous stuff. So it wouldn't be surprising if you had Giuliani or President Trump putting this Robert Livingston on the payroll. I don't know for sure. I don't know. But I tell you what, this testimony from all these different people, for one, they showed that the Trump administration was definitely doing a pressure campaign when it came to Ukrainian politics and to do investigations into the Bidens. Um, and of course, it also suggests to me that there's a lot of different people that are bringing up a lot more questions. There's a lot more questions that need to be answered uh, by this, people who are being brought before the House, impeachment inquiry. And so hopefully we get to find out some of these answers and get to connect all the different pieces of the Trump administration's goals in Ukraine and how it relates to Biden, how it relates to the Russians, and I guess what the entire purpose of it is. Should be fascinating.